Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of the orbital station Prometheus, watching Earth's blue marble slowly rotate beneath him. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, but he knew better. Down there, the Galactic Council's representatives were busy dividing up humanity's future like vultures picking at a carcass. The other species had arrived 3 months ago with promises of peace and integration into their vast galactic community. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline bodies that sparkled in any light. The Karathi, massive beings covered in thick, armored hide that made them look like walking tanks. The Velani, ethereal creatures who seemed to float rather than walk, their translucent skin revealing the strange organs beneath. All of them had one thing in common. They looked at humans the way a scientist might look at an interesting, but ultimately inferior specimen. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes and turned away from the viewport. At 35, he was considered young to be Earth's chief military advisor, but his record spoke for itself. 2 decades of service, countless peacekeeping missions, and a mind that could see patterns others missed. None of that seemed to matter now. The council chamber doors hissed open as he approached, and the familiar mixture of alien scents hit him. The Zephyrians smelled like ozone after a thunderstorm. The Karathi carried the metallic tang of iron and rust. The Velani had no scent at all, which somehow made them more unsettling than the others. Ambassador Sarah Williams looked up as he entered. Her face was composed, but Marcus could see the strain around her eyes. She had been negotiating with these beings for weeks, trying to secure the best possible terms for humanity's entry into the Galactic Council. "Ah, the human soldier arrives," said Zektar, the Zephyrian representative. His voice created a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was something mocking in his tone. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, what is your species' greatest military achievement?" Marcus felt the familiar weight of condescension in the question. Every conversation with these aliens felt like a test he was destined to fail. "That depends on how you measure achievement," he replied carefully. The massive Karathi, Gorthal, made a sound that might have been laughter. It came out as a deep rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. "Measure? Your species has never faced a real threat. You fight among yourselves with primitive weapons on a single world. You know nothing of true warfare." The Velani representative, Lysandra, floated closer to the table. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The humans show promise in their aggression, but they lack sophistication. Their military strategies are based on ancient concepts of territory and resources. They do not understand warfare on a galactic scale." Marcus bit back his first response. These beings had been saying variations of the same thing since they arrived. Humans were too primitive, too aggressive, too limited in their thinking. They would be given a minor role in the Galactic Council, something befitting their current level of development. "Perhaps," Marcus said slowly. "That's because we've never needed to think on a galactic scale before." Ambassador Williams shot him a warning look. The negotiations were delicate, and any sign of human aggression would only confirm the aliens' opinions about their species. Zektar's crystalline form shifted, creating new patterns of light across his surface. "Indeed, your species will learn much under our guidance. In time, you may even prove useful in our ongoing conflicts." "Ongoing conflicts?" Marcus asked. Gorthal's heavy head turned toward him. "The galaxy is not as peaceful as your limited perspective might suggest, human. There are threats that require management. The devourer swarms, for instance. Mindless creatures that consume everything in their path. They appear at the edge of our territory every few centuries." "And you deal with them how?" Marcus pressed. "We contain them," Lysandra said, her form rippling slightly. "We sacrifice peripheral worlds, evacuate what populations we can, and wait for the swarms to exhaust themselves. It is the most efficient strategy." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. You abandon entire worlds? When necessary, Zektar chimed. It is a calculated loss. The swarms eventually move on or die out when they run out of organic matter to consume. Attempting to fight them directly would cost far more lives and resources. But you have faster-than-light travel, orbital weapons platforms, energy shields, Marcus said. Surely there's a way to fight back effectively. The three aliens exchanged what Marcus had learned to recognize as their equivalent of amused looks. Gorthel spoke first. Human, you think like a ground dweller. You see a threat and imagine charging at it with whatever weapon you can find. The Devourer swarms are not something you can punch or shoot your way through. They are a force of nature, Lysandra added. You do not fight a hurricane, you shelter from it. Marcus wanted to argue, but he could see Ambassador Williams' expression growing more strained. The humans needed this alliance, even if the terms weren't ideal. Earth's resources were limited, and contact with alien civilizations had revealed just how vast and dangerous the universe could be. But something about the aliens' attitude bothered him beyond their obvious condescension. They spoke about these devourer swarms with the resignation of people who had given up before the fight even started. When was the last major incursion? Marcus asked. Zektar's chimes took on a different note. Approximately 400 of your years ago, a swarm consumed 17 worlds on the rim before burning itself out. We lost nearly 2 billion sentient beings, but we saved over 50 billion by evacuating threatened areas early. 17 worlds, Marcus repeated. How long did the swarm remain active? 3 years, Gorthel rumbled. A relatively brief incursion? Marcus did quick calculations in his head. 17 worlds in 3 years meant the swarm was consuming planets at a rate that would strip entire sectors bare if left unchecked. The alien spoke about it like it was an acceptable business expense. Have you ever tried coordinated military action against them? He asked. Of course. Lysandra's voice carried a note of impatience. The combined fleets of 7 species engaged a swarm 600 years ago. We lost over half our ships and barely managed to slow their advance. Direct confrontation is simply not viable. The meeting continued for another hour, covering trade agreements, technology exchanges, and humanity's future role in galactic civilization. Marcus listened with half his attention, while the other half kept turning over what he had learned about these devourer swarms. When the session finally ended, Marcus walked with Ambassador Williams toward the human quarters. The corridor was quiet except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. You were pushing pretty hard in there, Williams said. We can't afford to antagonize them. I know, Marcus replied, but something about their approach doesn't sit right with me. Williams stopped walking and turned to face him. Marcus, I know your instincts have served you well in the past, but this is bigger than any conflict humanity has ever faced. These species have thousands of years of experience dealing with galactic threats. Maybe their approach really is the only viable option. Marcus nodded, but he wasn't convinced. In his experience, there was always another option. Sometimes it just took a different perspective to see it. That night, Marcus sat in his quarters, reviewing everything the aliens had shared about the devourer swarms. The data was frustratingly sparse, mostly consisting of evacuation records and loss reports. But between the lines, he began to see patterns. The swarms appeared to follow certain routes through space, moving from system to system in predictable patterns. They consumed organic matter but seemed to ignore certain types of technology. They were described as mindless, but their movements suggested some kind of underlying intelligence or programming. Most interesting was what the aliens didn't talk about. They never mentioned attempts to study the swarms up close. They never discussed trying to understand what drove the creatures or where they came from. Their entire strategy seemed based on the assumption that the swarms were an unstoppable force of nature. Marcus had spent his career studying conflicts, and he had learned one fundamental truth. Every enemy had weaknesses. The key was being willing to look for them. He pulled up the star charts showing the locations of previous swarm incursions. The patterns were subtle, but they were there. The swarms didn't move randomly through space. They followed specific corridors, avoiding certain regions entirely. There were zones of space that seemed to repel them or redirect their movement. As Marcus traced the paths on his screen, a thought began to form. What if the aliens were wrong? What if the devourer swarms weren't unstoppable forces of nature, but something that could be understood, predicted, and eventually defeated? He spent the rest of the night pulling together every piece of information he could find. When he finally fell asleep at his desk, his dreams were filled with star charts and alien creatures moving through the darkness between worlds. The next morning brought news that would change everything. A Priority 1 alert from the Galactic Council's Deep Space Monitoring Network. Long-range sensors had detected an energy signature at the edge of the galaxy. The devourer swarms were returning. Marcus was in the briefing room when the news broke. He watched the faces of the alien representatives as they received the data, saw the way their confident demeanor cracked for just a moment before their practiced resignation settled back into place. Zektar was the first to speak. The signature matches previous incursions. Estimated time to reach inhabited systems is approximately 18 months. We must begin evacuation protocols immediately, Lysandra said. The predicted path suggests they will enter Council space through the Outer Rim territories. Gorthal's heavy breathing filled the room. How many worlds are in the projected path? Initial estimates suggest 23 inhabited systems, Zektar replied. Population approximately 3 billion sentient beings. 3 billion lives. Marcus felt the number settle in his stomach like a stone. The aliens were already talking about evacuation routes and refugee processing centers. They had given up before the fight even began. What about military response? Marcus asked. The room fell silent. 3 sets of alien eyes turned toward him with expressions that ranged from pity to annoyance. Human, Gorthal said slowly, we have explained this. Military response is not viable against the swarms. But you haven't tried anything new in hundreds of years, Marcus pressed. Your last major engagement was 6 centuries ago. Technology has advanced. Maybe there are new approaches. The fundamental nature of the threat has not changed, Lysandra said. The swarms adapt and evolve. Any strategy that fails initially becomes impossible to employ again. Marcus stood up from the table. Then maybe it's time for a new perspective. Ambassador Williams reached for his arm. Marcus, please. No, he said, pulling away. 3 billion lives. We're talking about abandoning 3 billion people without even trying to fight back. Zektar's crystalline form brightened with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as amusement. And what would you propose, young human? That we charge into battle against creatures that have consumed worlds for millions of years? I propose we study them, Marcus said. I propose we understand them. And then I propose we find a way to stop them. The alien laughter that followed was not pleasant. It was the sound of beings who had given up hope long ago, mocking someone who still believed in the possibility of victory. But Marcus had faced impossible odds before, and he had learned that sometimes the most devastating attacks came from directions the enemy never expected. The devourer swarms were coming. The Galactic Council was already preparing to sacrifice worlds to appease them. But Marcus Chen had a different idea. He was going to find a way to kill them all. Marcus Chen stood in the empty cargo bay that had been converted into his makeshift command center. 3 weeks had passed since the devourer swarms were detected, and the Galactic Council had refused his every request for resources, personnel, or access to their military databases. They treated him like a child playing with toys he didn't understand. But Marcus had not been idle. The walls around him were covered with holographic displays showing star charts, energy patterns, and mathematical models. At the center of it all was a three-dimensional representation of the approaching swarm, updated in real time by data stolen from Council sensors. He wasn't alone in the bay. Over the past weeks, others had joined his unauthorized research project. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist who had been frustrated by the Council's refusal to allow close study of alien specimens. Lieutenant Commander James Park, a tactical officer who shared Marcus's belief that every enemy could be defeated. Captain Maria Santos, a starship engineer who had been quietly modifying human vessels with technology reverse-engineered from alien designs. "Tell me what you've found," Marcus said, as Elena approached his workstation. Elena pulled up a series of biological scans on her tablet. "The Council's data is limited, but I've been analyzing everything we have on swarm physiology. They're not as mindless as the aliens claim." She projected her findings into the shared holographic space. The image showed a creature that looked like a cross between an insect and a machine, with metallic carapace segments and organic tissue underneath. "Look at this neural structure," Elena said, highlighting a section of the creature's head. "It's too complex for a purely instinct-driven organism. There's definitely higher cognitive function here." "They're intelligent?" Marcus asked. "More than that," Elena replied. "They're networked. Each individual creature appears to be connected to the others through some kind of biological quantum entanglement. They share information instantaneously across vast distances." James looked up from his tactical analysis. "That explains their coordination, but it also suggests a potential weakness." "Go on," Marcus said. "If they're all connected, then disrupting that connection could throw the entire swarm into chaos," James explained. "It's like cutting the communications lines in a conventional army." Marcus nodded slowly. The idea had merit, but the technical challenges would be enormous. "What would it take to disrupt a quantum biological network?" Maria spoke up from across the bay. "I've been working on that problem. The quantum entanglement would require a specific frequency resonance to maintain coherence. If we could generate an interference pattern—" She trailed off, pulling up her own projections. Mathematical equations floated in the air, describing wave functions and quantum probability matrices. "It would require a massive energy output," Maria continued. "More than any single ship could generate. We'd need a coordinated fleet action with precise timing across multiple points." "The Council would never authorize that kind of operation," Elena said. Marcus smiled grimly. "Then we don't ask for authorization." The room fell silent. What Marcus was suggesting bordered on treason. Humanity was still a junior member of the Galactic Council, dependent on alien technology and goodwill for survival. Acting without permission could result in humanity being expelled from the galactic community entirely. "Think about what you're saying," James said carefully. "If we fail, humanity becomes a pariah species. We'll be cut off from all alien technology, all trade relationships, everything." "And if we do nothing," Marcus replied, 3 billion people die, and then the next time the swarms appear, it'll be more. Eventually, they'll consume everything. And the Council's strategy of strategic retreat will lead to the extinction of every species in the galaxy." Elena was studying the biological data again. "There's something else," she said. "The swarms don't just consume organic matter randomly. They're selective. They target specific types of biological material." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Elena highlighted different sections of the alien reports. "Look at the consumption patterns. They avoid certain plant species, ignore some types of animal life entirely. It's like they're looking for something specific." Marcus felt the familiar tingle of intuition that had served him well in past conflicts. "They're not mindless destroyers. They're harvesters." "Harvesters of what?" Maria asked. "Intelligence," Marcus said, the pieces falling into place in his mind. They're harvesting intelligent life. That's why they target populated worlds and ignore barren planets. The implications were staggering. If the swarms were specifically hunting intelligent species, then the Council's strategy of evacuation wasn't just ineffective, it was exactly what the swarms wanted. By concentrating refugee populations in evacuation centers, the Council was essentially serving up massive buffets of intelligent life. "We need proof," Elena said. "The Council will never believe this theory based on speculation." "Then we get proof," Marcus replied. "James, what's the closest point we could intercept the swarm?" James called up the tactical display. "The outer sensor platforms in the Kepler system. It's uninhabited, but there are automated monitoring stations. If we could modify one of them—" "To do what?" Maria asked. Marcus was already thinking ahead. "To capture data from the swarm when it passes through. Real-time biological scans, behavioral analysis, communication intercepts. Everything we need to prove they're not mindless destroyers." "The Council will never authorize a mission to an active swarm zone," Elena pointed out. "No," Marcus agreed, "but they might authorize a routine maintenance mission to update the sensor platforms." Over the next week, Marcus worked through official channels to arrange what appeared to be a standard technical mission. Captain Santos would take a small maintenance crew to the Kepler system to perform routine upgrades on the sensor network. In reality, they would be installing Elena's biological scanners and James's communication intercept equipment. The aliens showed little interest in the mission. Routine human maintenance of automated systems was exactly the kind of minor role they expected humanity to play in the galactic community. Ambassador Williams was more suspicious. She cornered Marcus in the corridor outside his quarters 2 days before the mission was scheduled to launch. "I know you're planning something," she said without preamble. "The Council representatives have been asking questions about human military activities." "I'm conducting authorized research within approved parameters," Marcus replied. "Don't lie to me," Williams said. "I've seen the resource requisitions, the personnel transfers, the equipment modifications. You're preparing for something big." Marcus studied her face. Sarah Williams was a diplomat, but she had been a soldier before that. She understood the weight of command decisions and the burden of choosing between bad options and worse ones. 3 billion lives, Sarah, he said quietly. "That's what we're talking about. The Council wants to abandon 3 billion people without even trying to save them." "And if your plan fails? If you provoke the swarms or disrupt the evacuation efforts, how many more billions die then?" It was a fair question, and Marcus didn't have a good answer. Military planning always involved calculated risks, but the scale of this operation was beyond anything he had ever attempted. "I won't let fear of failure condemn 3 billion people to death," he said finally. Williams stared at him for a long moment. "If you're wrong about this, if your intervention makes things worse, history will remember you as the man who doomed humanity." "And if I'm right," Marcus replied, "history will remember me as the man who proved that humans don't give up without a fight." 2 days later, Captain Santos's maintenance vessel departed for the Kepler system. Officially, the mission was expected to take 5 days, 2 days travel each way, plus 1 day for routine maintenance work. Marcus spent those 5 days reviewing every piece of data they had on the swarms, looking for patterns and weaknesses. The biological quantum network remained their best target, but the technical challenges were massive. They would need perfect coordination across multiple fleet elements, precise timing, and energy outputs that pushed their equipment beyond normal operational limits. On the 6th day, Santos's ship returned ahead of schedule. Marcus was in the briefing room within minutes of their arrival. Elena's face on the communication screen was grim but excited. "We got everything we needed," she reported. "The swarms passed through the system exactly as predicted." "And?" Marcus prompted. "You were right," Elena said. They're definitely selective in their targeting, but it's worse than we thought. The data Elena had collected painted a terrifying picture. The swarms weren't just harvesting intelligent life. They were specifically targeting the most advanced civilizations they could find. The biological scans showed evidence of previously consumed technology integrated into their organic structure. They're learning, Elena explained. Each species they consume adds to their capabilities. They're not destroying civilizations. They're absorbing them. James appeared on the screen beside Elena. The communication intercepts confirmed the quantum network theory. But there's something else. The network isn't just for coordination. It's for processing and storing information from consumed species. They're building a database, Marcus realized, of every intelligent species in the galaxy. Which means, Maria added from off-screen, that every time the Council retreats and lets them consume another world, the swarms get stronger and smarter. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Council's strategy of strategic withdrawal wasn't just failing, it was actively making the threat worse. Each successful swarm incursion taught the creatures more about galactic civilization and made them more dangerous for the next encounter. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. The scope of the threat was far beyond what they had originally imagined, but that only made action more urgent. "Did you get enough data to model the quantum disruption attack?" he asked. Elena nodded. The network operates on multiple frequency bands, but there's a primary resonance that carries the core command structure. If we could generate a sustained interference pattern at that frequency— "How sustained?" Marcus asked. "At least 47 minutes, Maria said. That's how long it would take to completely collapse the network connections throughout the swarm. And how many ships would we need to generate that kind of interference?" James consulted his calculations. "Minimum of 12 vessels, positioned in a specific geometric pattern around the swarm. Each ship would need to maintain exact power output and positioning for the entire duration." Marcus did the math. 12 ships was more than half of humanity's total space-capable military fleet. The operation would require stripping Earth's defenses and committing everything to a single desperate gamble. "There's one more thing," Elena said. "The swarms are adaptive. If we try this attack and fail, they'll modify their network to prevent the same approach from working again." "So we only get one shot," Marcus said. "One shot," Elena confirmed. Marcus looked around the briefing room. In a few hours, he would have to make a decision that would determine the fate of humanity and potentially every other species in the galaxy. He could follow the Council's plan and watch 3 billion people die while the swarms grew stronger. Or he could gamble everything on an untested strategy that might save those lives or doom humanity to isolation and destruction. But as Marcus had learned long ago, sometimes the only choice was between different kinds of risk, and if he was going to fail, he would rather fail while fighting than while running away. "We're going to need ships," he said, "and crews willing to follow orders that haven't been approved by any government on Earth or off it." "You'll have them," a new voice said from the doorway. Marcus turned to see Admiral Patricia Hayes, the commander of Earth's space fleet, stepping into the briefing room. "Admiral," Marcus said, coming to attention, "I wasn't expecting you." Hayes smiled grimly. "Ambassador Williams told me about your unauthorized research project. She also told me about your findings." Marcus felt his heart sink. If Hayes was here to shut down the operation, there would be no appeal and no second chances. "Sir," he began, "I can explain—" "No need," Hayes interrupted. "You're absolutely right. The Council's approach is not just wrong, it's suicidal. And if humanity is going to survive in this galaxy, we need to prove we're more than just another species waiting to be harvested." She moved to the tactical display and began highlighting ship positions. "I can give you 14 vessels. It's everything we have except the bare minimum needed to defend Earth. But Marcus—" She turned to face him directly. "If this fails, If you're wrong about the swarms or the quantum disruption doesn't work, humanity will be defenseless. The Council will abandon us and we'll have no way to protect ourselves from the next threat. Understood, Admiral. Good, Hayes said, because in 18 hours you're going to be in command of the largest military operation in human history, and the only backup plan is prayer. Marcus nodded, accepting the weight of command and all the lives that now depended on his decisions. In 18 hours, they would find out if humanity's refusal to surrender would save the galaxy or doom it to destruction. But for the first time since the swarms had been detected, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. They had a plan, they had the ships, and they had crews willing to follow him into the unknown. The Galactic Council might have written off those 3 billion lives, but humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to fight for every single person worth saving. The human fleet moved through space in complete silence, 14 ships arranged in a formation that would have puzzled any military strategist from Earth's past. They weren't positioned for mutual defense or coordinated assault. Instead, they formed a complex three-dimensional geometric pattern that existed only in the mathematical models Elena Vasquez had developed. Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, watching the tactical display as they approached the interception point. In 6 hours, the Devourer swarms would reach the outer edge of the Kepler system. In 7 hours, they would begin their assault on the first inhabited world in their path. Unless Marcus was right about everything. "Fleet status report," he called out. "All ships in position and holding," came the reply from Lieutenant Commander Park, who was coordinating the fleet from the communication station. "Quantum resonance generators are powered and calibrated. Each vessel reports ready for synchronized activation." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the sensor readings streaming across his displays. The swarms were larger than the historical records had suggested. Where past incursions had involved hundreds of thousands of creatures, the approaching swarm contained millions. "Sir," called out Dr. Vasquez from her science station, "I'm picking up something unusual in the swarm's approach vector." "Define unusual," Marcus replied. Elena's fingers flew across her controls, pulling up biological scan data. "The lead elements aren't moving randomly. They're conducting systematic sweeps of the space ahead of the main swarm. It's almost like..." "Scouting," Marcus finished. "They're looking for threats." The implications sent a chill down his spine. The Devourer swarms weren't just mindless harvesters. They had learned from past encounters with galactic military forces and developed countermeasures. "How much do they know about our fleet?" Marcus asked. "Unknown," Elena replied. "But if they can detect our energy signatures..." She didn't need to finish the thought. If the swarms could identify the human fleet as a threat before the quantum disruption attack began, they might adapt their network structure or simply avoid the area entirely. The entire operation depended on catching them by surprise. "All ships, implement stealth protocols," Marcus ordered. "Minimum power, passive sensors only. We're ghosts until I say otherwise." The acknowledgments came back quickly, and Marcus watched the tactical display as 14 human vessels effectively disappeared from normal space. The stealth technology was reverse-engineered from alien designs, modified by human ingenuity to operate beyond normal specifications. For the next 4 hours, they waited in the darkness between stars. Marcus used the time to review the plan one more time. When the swarms entered the kill zone, all 14 ships would simultaneously activate their quantum resonance generators. The coordinated energy output would create an interference pattern designed to disrupt the biological quantum network that connected individual swarm creatures to the collective intelligence. If Elena's calculations were correct, the network disruption would leave millions of creatures suddenly isolated, confused, and unable to coordinate their actions. Without the collective intelligence guiding them, they would become vulnerable to conventional military tactics. If Elena's calculations were wrong, or if the swarms had somehow evolved beyond their previous network structure, then 14 ships and their crews would be destroyed, and humanity would face the consequences of their unauthorized military action. "Contact," announced the sensor operator. "Long-range scanners are detecting the swarm's approach. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Marcus felt the familiar pre-battle tension settle over the bridge. Every member of his crew knew what they were risking, not just their lives, but the future of their species. "Fleet commanders, final systems check," Marcus ordered. The reports came back quickly. All ships were ready, all crews were prepared. All they needed now was the courage to take the greatest gamble in human history. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus found himself thinking about the Galactic Council representatives who had dismissed his plans with such casual arrogance. Zektar, with his crystalline chimes that carried undertones of mockery. Gorthel with his massive frame and fatalistic acceptance of loss. Lysandra with her ethereal beauty and cold calculation of acceptable casualties. They had seen the approaching swarms as a natural disaster to be endured, rather than an enemy to be defeated. Perhaps that was the fundamental difference between humans and the other galactic species. When faced with impossible odds, humans had a tendency to make the odds irrelevant. 20 minutes to contact, the sensor operator reported. "Swarm formation is maintaining course and speed." Marcus opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Defiance. In 20 minutes, we're going to attempt something that has never been tried before. We're going to prove that no enemy is truly unstoppable, no matter how long they've terrorized the galaxy." He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. These people had volunteered for a mission that their own government hadn't authorized, following a plan that alien experts had declared impossible. If we succeed today, we save 3 billion lives and prove that humanity deserves a place among the stars. If we fail, we go down fighting, which is more than anyone else has been willing to do for 600 years. 10 minutes to contact. Swarm scouts have entered sensor range. On the main display, Marcus could see them now. Individual creatures the size of small starships, moving with purpose and intelligence through the void. Behind them, the main swarm stretched across space like a dark cloud of living destruction. Elena looked up from her instruments. "Confirmed biological signatures match our projections. The quantum network is active and operating within expected parameters. All ships report ready for synchronized activation," James announced. Marcus took a deep breath. Everything came down to the next few minutes. Either Elena's theories about quantum biological networks were correct, or they were about to commit the most spectacular suicide in military history. 5 minutes to optimal firing position. The swarm scouts were passing through their formation now, massive creatures that ignored the invisible human ships as they swept the area ahead of the main force. Marcus could see details of their construction on the enhanced sensors, part organic, part technological, clearly showing evidence of absorbed alien technology integrated into their biological structure. 2 minutes. Marcus opened the communication channel again. "All ships, prepare for quantum resonance activation. Target frequency 774.9 terahertz. Synchronized pulse begins on my mark. Optimal position reached. All ships in formation." Marcus looked at the tactical display one final time. 14 human ships surrounded by millions of alien creatures, preparing to test a theory that could save the galaxy or destroy themselves in the attempt. Fleet activation in 3, 2, 1. Mark. The quantum resonance generators came online simultaneously across all 14 ships. Marcus felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet as massive amounts of energy flowed through the ship's modified power systems. On the display, he could see energy patterns spreading out from each vessel, overlapping and interfering with each other to create the precise frequency pattern Elena had calculated. For 10 seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then the swarm began to fall apart. Individual creatures that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly veered off course, colliding with their neighbors. The precise formation that had been maintained across millions of beings dissolved into chaos as the quantum network connecting them collapsed. "It's working," Elena breathed, staring at her sensors in amazement. "The network disruption is spreading throughout the entire swarm." On the display, Marcus could see the effects cascading through the alien formation. Creatures that had been acting as a unified intelligence were now behaving like confused animals, moving randomly or simply stopping in place. But the effect wasn't uniform. Some sections of the swarm seemed less affected than others, and Marcus could see adaptation beginning already. "They're trying to re-establish network connections," Elena reported. "Some individuals are developing resistance to the interference pattern." "How long before they succeed?" Marcus asked. "At current adaptation rates, partial network restoration in 15 minutes. Full restoration in 43 minutes. Marcus smiled grimly. They had 43 minutes to destroy an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. It would have to be enough. "All ships, initiate attack pattern Delta. Target the largest individuals first. They're likely the network nodes trying to coordinate restoration." The human fleet moved into action with precision that would have impressed their alien critics. 14 ships against millions of creatures. But for the first time in galactic history, the swarms were vulnerable. Plasma cannons and missile batteries opened fire, targeting the massive creatures that Elena's sensors identified as network coordinators. Each successful hit seemed to further disrupt the swarm's ability to reorganize itself. But Marcus could see that they were running out of time. Despite the network disruption, some swarm elements were beginning to coordinate again. Smaller groups were forming defensive clusters and starting to target the human ships. "Incoming fire from Sector 7, the tactical officer reported. "Enemy creatures are adapting faster than projected." "Evasive maneuvers," Marcus ordered. "Continue targeting network nodes." The battle became a deadly race against time. The human fleet had to eliminate enough of the swarm's command structure to permanently cripple the network before the creatures could adapt to the quantum interference. Every minute that passed saw more swarm elements breaking free of the disruption effect. "Marcus," Elena called out urgently, "I'm detecting a new development. Some of the creatures are beginning to merge." "Merge how?" "Physical integration. They're combining their biological mass to create larger, more complex organisms. I think they're trying to build redundant network pathways." Marcus watched the tactical display as individual swarm creatures began joining together, forming new entities that seemed less affected by the quantum interference. The swarms weren't just adapting to the attack. They were evolving in real time. "Time to complete network restoration?" he asked. 12 minutes at current adaptation rate," Elena replied. "But if they continue merging at this pace, it could be much faster." Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour earlier. "All ships, implement attack pattern Omega. Focus all fire on the merger sites." Attack pattern Omega was a close-range assault formation that brought the human ships well within the swarm's defensive perimeter. It was tactically risky under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. "Sir," James said carefully, "Omega pattern will put us directly in the path of swarm counterattacks." "Noted," Marcus replied. "Execute the order." The 14 ships drove deeper into the swarm formation, concentrating their firepower on the sites where creatures were attempting to merge. The strategy worked, but it came at a cost. Several human vessels took damage from swarm defensive fire, and Marcus could see that they wouldn't be able to maintain this level of intensity much longer. 8 minutes to network restoration, Elena announced. But the merger process is slowing down. I think we're disrupting their ability to form stable connections. Marcus felt a moment of hope, but it was quickly crushed by a new development. Contact, the sensor operator called out. New energy signatures detected at the edge of the system. It's another swarm. Marcus felt his heart sink as the tactical display updated. A second swarm, roughly half the size of the first, was entering the system. The creatures they were fighting weren't the entire threat. They were just the advance force. Time to second swarm engagement? Marcus asked. 14 minutes, came the reply. Marcus did the calculations quickly. They needed at least 8 more minutes to permanently cripple the first swarm's network, but the second swarm would arrive before they could finish the job, and his fleet was already damaged and low on ammunition. But as Marcus looked at the tactical display, he realized something that changed everything. The second swarm was maintaining perfect formation and coordination. Its network was still intact and functioning normally. Elena, he said slowly, if we can capture one of the network nodes from the first swarm. You want to study their network technology? She asked. I want to turn it against them, Marcus replied. If we can reverse engineer their quantum biological network, we might be able to use it to disrupt other swarms. It was a desperate plan, but desperation had been their situation from the beginning. Instead of just defeating one swarm, they might be able to develop a weapon that could protect the galaxy permanently. All ships, Marcus broadcast. New objective. We're going to capture a live network node from the first swarm. Prepare boarding parties and containment fields. The next few minutes were the most intense of Marcus's military career. While continuing to fight off increasingly organized swarm counterattacks, human boarding teams had to capture and contain one of the massive creatures that served as network coordinators. The operation succeeded, barely, just as the second swarm reached engagement range. First swarm network completely collapsed, Elena reported with exhausted satisfaction. The remaining creatures are behaving like simple animals. No coordination, no intelligence, no threat. Marcus watched as millions of terrifying alien creatures suddenly became confused and helpless, floating in space without the collective intelligence that had made them unstoppable for so long. But the second swarm was approaching fast, and his damaged fleet wouldn't survive another battle like the one they had just fought. All ships, prepare for emergency retreat, Marcus ordered. We've got what we came for. As the human fleet withdrew from the battlefield, leaving behind the wreckage of a threat that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done something that the Galactic Council had declared impossible. They had proven that the Devourer swarms could be defeated, and now they had the tools to make that victory permanent. The real war was just beginning. They mocked him in silence. Then the Reaper struck 6 months after the Battle of Kepler. Marcus Chen stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber. But everything had changed. The same 3 alien representatives sat at their positions, but their postures were different. Gone was the casual dismissal and condescending amusement. In its place was something Marcus had never seen from them before. Respect tinged with fear. The captured swarm network node hung in a containment field at the center of the chamber, its massive bulk pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that Elena Vasquez had learned to interpret as fragments of absorbed consciousness from dozens of extinct civilizations. The preliminary analysis confirms our findings, Elena reported to the assembled representatives. The Devourer swarms aren't just consuming intelligent life, they're preserving it. Every species they've encountered over the past million years exists as stored consciousness patterns within their collective network. Ambassador Zektar's crystalline form flickered with patterns Marcus had never seen before. You are saying the swarms contain the minds of species destroyed thousands of years ago? Millions of minds, Elena confirmed, absorbed, processed, and integrated into their collective intelligence. The swarms weren't destroying civilizations, they were collecting them. The implications had staggered the council when Elena first presented her findings 3 months ago. Every species the galaxy had mourned as extinct still existed within the swarm network, trapped in a form of digital consciousness that had driven the swarm's evolution and increasing intelligence. Marcus stepped forward to address the council directly. We've developed a method to extract and restore these consciousness patterns. The Karathi colony on Veltar that was consumed 400 years ago, they're all still there, preserved in quantum storage within the swarm network. Gorthal's massive frame shifted uneasily. This is impossible. The Veltar colony contained over 2 million Karathi. They cannot simply be restored after centuries of death. They weren't dead, Marcus replied. They were converted into information and stored, and now we can convert them back. The technology had taken 6 months to develop, combining human computer science with alien quantum processing and the biological network architecture, reverse-engineered from the captured swarm node. The first successful restoration had been a single consciousness from a species extinct for over 50,000 years, a being that remembered its civilization's final moments and the terror of absorption into the swarm collective. But the real breakthrough had come when Elena discovered that the consciousness extraction process could be reversed. Instead of the swarms absorbing civilizations, they could use the swarm network to restore them. Lysaandra's ethereal form rippled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as deep distress. If this is true, then our strategies of evacuation and containment have been condemning entire civilizations to a fate worse than death, Marcus finished. But that changes now. He activated the holographic display showing the current swarm positions throughout the galaxy. Red markers indicated active swarms, while blue markers showed the locations of defeated swarm clusters. Over the past 6 months, human forces have eliminated 12 swarm clusters using quantum network disruption technology. We've captured 17 network nodes intact, preserving the consciousness patterns of over 40 million beings from 23 different species. The numbers had grown steadily as human fleets, now equipped with quantum resonance weapons, systematically hunted down swarm clusters throughout the galaxy. Each victory not only eliminated a threat, but rescued entire civilizations that had been trapped for centuries. The Terran Coalition is prepared to share this technology with all council members, Marcus announced. But we require significant changes to current galactic policy regarding swarm encounters. Ambassador Williams stepped forward to present the formal proposal. The humans were no longer asking for acceptance into the galactic community. They were demanding leadership of the anti-swarm campaign. First, Williams said, immediate cessation of all evacuation and containment strategies. Every swarm encounter must now be treated as a rescue mission for trapped consciousness patterns. Second, full military cooperation in joint human-alien task forces equipped with quantum disruption weapons. The swarms are learning to adapt to our attacks, which means we need larger, more diverse fleets to maintain tactical advantage. Third, establishment of consciousness restoration facilities on every major world. The beings we rescue will need extensive support to reintegrate with galactic civilization after centuries of imprisonment. Zektar's chimes carried a note of uncertainty. You are asking us to completely restructure our military and social policies based on unproven human theories. Unproven? Marcus asked, gesturing to the containment field. We have 17 captured network nodes containing millions of preserved consciousness patterns. We've successfully restored over 300 individuals so far. How much more proof do you need? The tactical risks remain enormous, Gorthal rumbled. If your quantum disruption fails against an adapted swarm, entire fleets could be destroyed. "And if we continue your old strategy," Marcus replied, "entire civilizations will continue to be condemned to eternal imprisonment. We've proven the swarms can be defeated. The only question is whether you have the courage to fight for every consciousness they've stolen." The debate continued for hours, but Marcus could see the outcome was inevitable. The other council species had lived with the swarms for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to hope for victory. Humans had changed that equation permanently. 3 days later, the Galactic Council formally ratified the new anti-swarm protocols. Human quantum disruption technology would be shared with all member species. Joint task forces would be established under human tactical command. Most importantly, every swarm encounter would be treated as a rescue mission rather than a containment operation. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the new flagship Redemption, watching as the largest combined fleet in galactic history prepared for departure. Over 200 ships from 17 different species, all equipped with quantum resonance weapons and consciousness extraction technology. Their target was the Maelstrom Cluster, a region of space that had been abandoned for over 800 years after a massive swarm incursion. Intelligence suggested it contained the largest concentration of network nodes in the galaxy, potentially holding the consciousness patterns of entire civilizations that had been written off as permanently lost. "Fleet status report," Marcus requested. "All ships report ready," came the response from Captain Santos, who now commanded the human contingent of the fleet. "Alien vessels have completed integration with our tactical network. We have full coordination across all 217 vessels." Marcus nodded with satisfaction. The sight would have seemed impossible a year ago. Alien warships taking orders from human tactical officers, following strategies developed by the species they had once dismissed as primitives. Elena's voice came through the communication system from her science vessel. "Long-range scans confirm massive swarm presence in the Maelstrom Cluster. Preliminary estimates suggest at least 40 network nodes, possibly containing consciousness patterns from over 100 different species." 100 species. Entire civilizations that the galaxy had mourned as extinct, now waiting for rescue from their quantum prison. "All ships," Marcus broadcast to the fleet, "initiate approach to the Maelstrom Cluster. Today we prove that no one is ever truly lost, and no enemy is truly unstoppable." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Instead of the desperate struggles of the past, where alien fleets had fought merely to delay inevitable defeat, this was a coordinated assault by beings who knew they could win. The swarms in the Maelstrom Cluster had evolved significantly since the Kepler encounter. They maintained multiple redundant networks, used adaptive frequency shifting to resist quantum disruption, and demonstrated tactical intelligence that suggested they had learned from every previous defeat. But they faced an enemy they had never encountered before, a galactic civilization that had stopped running and started fighting. The quantum disruption weapons worked exactly as designed. One by one, swarm networks collapsed under sustained interference patterns. Creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years found themselves isolated and vulnerable, their collective intelligence shattered into individual confusion. The consciousness extraction process was even more successful than Elena had hoped. As each network node was captured, thousands of preserved minds were recovered, beings who had been trapped in quantum storage for centuries, watching helplessly as their captors consumed world after world. Among the rescued consciousness patterns were the complete populations of civilizations that had been considered the greatest losses in galactic history. The ethereal architects, whose city worlds had been marvels of artistic engineering. The deep thinkers, whose philosophical insights had shaped early galactic culture. The Star Weavers, whose mastery of space-time manipulation had been lost for over 3,000 years. But perhaps most significant was the discovery of the original swarm, the first creatures to develop the biological quantum network technology. They had been a peaceful species called the Gardeners, who had created the network as a way to share knowledge and maintain ecological balance across multiple worlds. The corruption of their technology into a weapon of consumption and imprisonment had been the work of another species entirely, parasitic entities that had infected the Gardener network and twisted it to their own purposes. The real devourer swarms were the parasites, not their victims. Final network disruption successful, Elena reported as the last swarm cluster in the maelstrom fell silent. All 43 network nodes secured. Preliminary consciousness counts suggest over 150 million recovered minds from 107 different species. Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction as he watched the aftermath of the battle. Scattered across the maelstrom cluster, the remains of millions of swarm creatures drifted harmlessly in space. For the first time in galactic history, a major swarm concentration had been completely eliminated with 0 casualties among the rescue fleet. All ships, begin consciousness extraction operations, Marcus ordered. Let's bring them home. Over the following weeks, as restored consciousness patterns were transferred to new bodies using alien cloning technology, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't just defeated an ancient enemy, they had restored entire chapters of galactic history that had been thought lost forever. The Galactic Council chamber looked very different when Marcus returned for the final strategic briefing. Representatives from dozens of species that had been extinct for centuries now sat alongside the traditional council members. The ethereal architects shimmered with patterns of light that painted complex mathematical equations in the air. The deep thinkers communicated through harmonic resonances that seemed to reach directly into the listener's mind. The Star Weavers existed as shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and at the head of the table sat Marcus Chen, the human military advisor who had refused to accept the galaxy's resignation to eternal defeat. Status report on remaining swarm clusters, Marcus requested. The tactical display showed a galaxy transformed. Where once red markers had indicated dozens of active swarm threats, now only 3 remained. Scattered groups of parasitically infected creatures that had lost their network coordination and posed no significant threat to galactic civilization. Estimated time to complete elimination of remaining swarms, Marcus asked. 6 months, came the reply from the Joint Task Force commander, a Zephyrian who had once mocked human military capabilities. All remaining clusters are isolated and vulnerable to quantum disruption. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. In less than 2 years, humanity had gone from being dismissed as primitives to leading the greatest military campaign in galactic history. They had proven that every enemy could be defeated, every loss could be recovered, and no sacrifice was too great when fighting for the preservation of consciousness and civilization. But perhaps most importantly, they had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten over millions of years of strategic retreat and acceptable losses. Sometimes the most devastating attack comes not from superior firepower or advanced technology, but from the simple refusal to accept defeat. The devourer swarms had ruled the galaxy through fear for millions of years, consuming entire civilizations while their victims watched helplessly from the sidelines. They had made one critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated the species that looked at impossible odds and decided to make them irrelevant. The species that saw 3 billion lives marked for sacrifice and decided that number was unacceptable. The species that turned defeat into victory by refusing to accept that any fight was unwinnable. Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of the Redemption one final time, watching as the last swarm cluster in the galaxy fell to quantum disruption weapons. Around him, beings from over 100 different species, many of whom had been considered extinct for millennia, worked together to build a future where no consciousness would ever again face imprisonment or absorption. The galaxy had mocked humanity in silence, dismissing them as too primitive and aggressive to understand the complexities of galactic civilization. But when the Reaper struck, when the ancient terror of the Devourer swarms had threatened to consume 3 billion more lives, it was those same primitives who had stood up and said, "Not on our watch," and in the end, that had made all the difference.